Michael Papich, welcome to the Right in the Head podcast. Before we dive into today's episode, I do want to check, is the shoot, is it still going? Are you wrapped now? How was that experience?
Good. Thanks for asking. Thanks for having me on. We shot 4 days this past week, and then we have another 3 days, probably only 3 days of shooting in February.
Okay.
Just because we're bringing in people from outside of the state as well. They're all working actors who have to work on other things, so we can only do so many days in a row.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we on Friday, I had to literally drive one of the actors from set to the airport because they were shooting something the next day
Wow. That's
through
the
a
life.
through a snowstorm,
Oof.
which sort of affected the flight. I found out after the fact, but
Yeah.
everyone got home safe. Everyone's good.
Glad to
So
hear that. And it was a good first few days of filming?
I thought so. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard
Yeah.
to
It
tell
was
before you see it, isn't it?
sure. Yeah. I mean, I've looked at some of the footage and I've heard the recordings, and it was all really good. It was my first time working with an AD, first time working with people from out of state. So. Even though I still kind of shot it in my style, which looks kind of wonky, it was a much more kind of professional shoot in a lot of ways.
Mm.
So that was sort of took some getting used to, but I mean the main thing was all my cast and crew were really, really strong. I mean the least experienced person on set was me, so
You know what? I
which
think that's
that works
great.
out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you've surrounded yourself with talent, and that's a good strategy, if you ask me. So let's talk about today's theme. We're talking about this going from an idea to a script. And I started to map out some questions around this theme. And actually, where it took me to was, hang on a second, what do I even count as an idea? Because I have 100 ideas every day,
Sure.
as I'm sure you
All right.
do as
My
well.
cat's about to jump in front of the camera. No problem. Just keep going.
We're off to a great start.
That's fine.
Um, So I don't develop all of them. That would be
Yeah.
ridiculous. So I'd like to ask you this, and this is coming from a place of this is something I actually still struggle with. How do
Mhm.
you define an idea that's actually worth developing versus an idea that's, it was a fleeting thought, probably not going to latch on to that one?
I think you can't really know until you try to develop it, to be honest. There's definitely, I mean, the ideas that I don't try to develop personally, it's because it's too similar to something I've done before. Or I just sort of get a personal feeling where I'm like, that's kind of, there's too many stuff that's similar to that, that's a little hacky, etc. But in terms of whether or not an idea is kind of usable, it it is usually once you start through that development process,
Hmm.
and I kind of have my own process of that, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
that's a little tease. But yeah, I mean, once it goes through that process, you'll figure out if you, at least for me, I'll figure out like, this doesn't actually have the legs that I thought it did, or
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
I don't like this kind of terminology, but like the idea that I'm not the right person for this. Like I've had like ideas for horror stories, and I'm just not a. I've kind of learned that I'm not really a horror person, so pretty quickly into development, I'll kind of figure out that I don't really have what I feel like I would need to kind of develop this properly. So there's things like that, but otherwise, it's really a matter of you kind of have to sit down and go through these processes I've developed before you really know like it's not the right one. And sometimes it's just a matter of sitting with it for however many years, and sometimes it'll click.
Hmm. Interesting. So do you have a way of recording every idea that comes to you, even if it is just a log line or a concept? Do you jot those down and circle back to them at some point? Or is it more like you just know instinctively, I'm not gonna even do that with that idea because that's too much like something I've already done? Yeah, at what point do you sort of write something off versus start the development even just a bit to see if it does have legs?
Um, I mean, I usually start to develop just about everything,
Hmm.
and then it's just a matter of how far I get.
You must be very busy.
Well, I take the very first steps. I don't write out
Right.
A whole you know
Right. You're not doing pitch
outline.
decks for every
No,
idea.
exactly. Yeah, it's just a matter of the first steps of really like kind of thinking about it and dreaming about it.
Right.
Um,
Right.
you
Let's
know,
kind of get
yeah.
into that a bit. So you've got the idea, and I'm projecting now because I'm going to say you've written something down that you're intrigued by. That's me
Sure.
because that's what I do. And it's a note on my phone or a voice
Yeah.
recording or something like that. What's the first step for you in determining whether this is going to go the distance and become a script? What do you do first? We'll get back to the chat with Michael in just a second. Firstly, if you are enjoying today's episode, I really hope you are, go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Also, feel free to leave us a comment. It will please the YouTube algorithm, so this content will show up for more screenwriters. Let me know, what's your process? How do you go from an initial idea to a script? All right, back to the chat.
For me, I always start with character. That's one, that's how I just like to write. I'm very kind of character driven, but I mean, when it comes to me, when it comes to movies that kind of stick with me, it's always character first. That's always kind of what I'll keep coming back to. I think for most people, even if they say they love, a story or a movie, typically it's not like the plot that they're talking about. It really is either the theme or the characters. So I'll always just sit down and think about, who's this kind of central character that this idea revolves around. Which is how I kind of a lot of my stories are very kind of centered on one character who has, something is unique about them, whether it's um, their career or they've got some sort of personal problem that kind of it revolves around. So you kind of have something to go with from there. And then from there, yeah, I just sort of think about this character, what they what they kind of want out of this story, what kind of the problems they face are. And if I'm not really getting anything, then that's usually a sign that this is not really an idea that I have enough kind of emotional investment in to really make something out of.
When you say you're not really getting anything, what do you mean by I'm really fascinated in like
Sure.
what's actually going on in your mind at that point. It either pulls you in or it doesn't. The character's either exciting to you or it's not. So you've kind of alluded to it in they've got this thing that they want and that's exciting. Is there something else at play though? Is there some kind of characteristic you look for or something else that really gets you?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's an idea of kind of understanding their psychology. And it doesn't have to be anything super, deep or tortured, but just like on a real basic level, it's like, do I kind of understand who this character is? Or do I understand who this person is? Um, and then like with the last thing I tried to develop as like a horror movie, it was sort of it was a little meta. It was like about someone who's really into horror movies, and they kind of they try to kind of push the envelope and they get to a point where they can't really continue. And I try to sit down and I say, okay, well, what makes this person really like, these kinds of lurid stories? And I couldn't really find anything. And so at that point I was like, okay, I don't really know who my character is, so how am I going to write them? How am I going to kind of put them in this adventure? Like I could write, you can come up with an outline, you can come up with a plot, but if you don't really know who you're following and you don't know how to write them, it's something's going to be missing. So I always just, and then on the opposite way, I mean, yeah, I'll have a story where I really have no idea of what's going to happen in the story. I just kind of have this idea of a character, and then I just sort of sit down and I say, okay, this is a story about someone who's in kind of like a cutthroat business who wants to get ahead, and I'll start to say, okay, well, what kind of business do they work in? Like I won't even have that idea, and I'll say, okay, well, if it's cutthroat, it's probably be something important. Okay, what are like the important things in life? What are the things where people are ruthless? And I was like, okay, the law, politics, and then I just get into like kind of like banking, and then I think, okay, business, and then I say, okay, what are the businesses that touch everybody's lives? And then I got to like food, and then that I kind of took it from there, and that's a very kind of basic outline, and then from there I take it in terms of what does this guy want? Why is it so important to him to succeed in his business? Why is he not succeeding? How does he feel about that? How does that touch his personal life? And the more you get that, the more that helps shape the rest of the story, I think.
Yeah, and I'm picking up on things there that I want to unpick. So, how much of that is what you see as the important things in the world versus general important things in the let me phrase that in a better way.
Sure. I mean, that's, yeah.
You might think of it as, okay, finance is an important thing, because most people would say finance is an important thing. Is that okay for you, as okay, that's something this character is into? Or does it need to feel more like I actually, as in Michael, care about this particular subject? Because I've seen writers do it in different ways, and I think for me, I'm still approaching it from different ways each time. It's either something that's important on a global scale, so I probably should have an opinion on this, versus this is actually something that's really important to me right now, so I feel like I can write this. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's column A, column B. There's definitely times where I'll be really into something and I'll say, okay, I want to write a story about basketball, and so I wrote a script about basketball. There'll be things where just the idea kind of comes to you. It sort of touches something that's either in the news or just sort of in the zeitgeist. Um, and then I'll do, I mean, research is a big part of my process too. So there's plenty of things I've written about that I don't really understand personally. I mean, I don't really understand basketball that well either. I just like watching it. But
And yet you managed to write a great script. It was called Space Jam. You can go and see it. It stars Michael Jordan. You did really well with that one.
yes. And I said I get a bonus if there is never a sequel. And so I lost all my money. Um,
Damn you, LeBron.
yeah, that's gonna hurt the GOAT conversation,
I
unfortunately, in
actually
my
didn't hate
mind.
the movie, I have to say, but
The new Space Jam?
I didn't hate it.
Okay. I don't have Max,
Do we
so
have to conclude the interview at this point? Is that
no, it's fine.
that's a deal
I
breaker?
didn't see it, so I can't really say with any
Okay,
authority. But
right. Did you see the original?
they showed it to us in preschool,
Wow.
so that ages me very
You
specifically.
think
But
it
yeah,
ages you? I watched it
well,
as
I
a
know. Well, yeah.
teenager. So,
I mean, specifically it ages. Well, I mean, I'm from North Carolina, so I mean,
yeah.
Michael Jordan has that sort of connection here. So I don't know that I picked up on it at the time, but we claimed him, even
I
though
think it's
obviously he
a fair
played for
claim. Fair
Chicago. Yeah,
claim.
I mean, it makes sense.
We seem to have
But
derailed slightly.
a little. I was about to say, like, where was I? Um, yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, I mean, research is a really important part of my process too. So whenever I'm writing about something that I don't understand, if I feel like it's important, I'll spend a lot of time doing research, both so that I kind of know what I'm talking about, because it'll come through if you're just making stuff up. Um, but also it helps kind of guide the story. Like I'm if I'm writing a story about financing, for example, and I just know, okay, I know the financial markets are important to the world. I want to write a story about that. I don't know anything about it. Um, Once you do research, not only can you be authoritative, but I think things are going to kind of stick out in your head, like, oh, that's interesting, that's interesting, that's interesting, and you can kind of go from there. Like I did a story about people who play blackjack professionally and like travel around the world playing, or not the world, but the country playing blackjack. And I knew nothing about that. I didn't go to casinos, but I just watched documentaries and I read, and just bit by bit getting those kind of really human details. Certain things will just kind of stick out to you. And I think in your head, you're going to know kind of where your landmarks in your story are going to be even before you write it. Um, and so, yeah, and I think, yeah, so, and having that kind of guide helps. And then whenever you're stuck, I think knowing your character or knowing your theme, I think the two go hand in hand. Knowing your character, your theme is going to help you figure out
Yeah.
where this goes next.
Yeah, and how much does market play into this early on in this process for you? Do you look at what the market is buying currently? Is it too soon to do that based on your starting point being character? Do you get that firmed up, and then when you're thinking about story or plot, maybe that's when you start to look at what's being bought at the moment? Or do you not pay attention to that market stuff and you just write what you want to write and look at promoting it in the right way?
I would say I'm where I am is I just want to write the best thing I can, and to me that means doing this whole process. So looking at the market has never really been a motivator for me, because I feel like I have to kind of have that activation to write, what I think is a strong script, um, and kind of chasing a trend is not going to really work out in the same way. I think if it's a strong enough script, things that kind of, especially if you're writing, in the modern day, things that are in the kind of cultural memory are going to be in there. And there's going to be things that, any, PR or marketing person can point to and say, that's something that people are talking about. That's something people are interested in, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I pay attention to the market in the sense that I see movies that I don't like, and I think, here's what I'd like to do differently. So, I mean, there's that element to it. Like I've had people tell me my scripts read more like scripts from like the 60s or 70s,
Is
because I'm
that a
not.
compliment? I assume
I
that's a
think they mean
compliment.
it as a compliment.
Yeah.
Not that I'm not like a curmudgeon. I don't think like all modern movies are bad. But there is definitely things about kind of older movies that I like that I try to kind of graft onto movies set in the present day. Like I've only ever written
Hmm.
one script that wasn't set in just, whatever the day is that I'm writing.
Ah, interesting. Okay, okay. But you are trying to borrow from scripts of yonder days and somehow try to recreate some of that atmosphere, would you say, or
I guess
character?
so.
What is it that you like
Probably,
about
yeah.
those?
I mean, probably. I mean, I think there a lot of the older movies I like are more play-like in a way, a lot more kind of dialogue based, which is what I kind of like to write. So,
Mm. Hmm.
um, things like the Sweet Smell of Success is like a movie I'll rewatch a lot just to kind of get notes for myself. Even though that's from the 50s. And
Yeah, that's really interesting.
but I'll
Yeah.
still kind of, I'll take that kind of same sentiment and, write it in stories set in 2025.
It's funny that we all have those movies that we go back and rewatch when we feel like we need some inspiration or some guidance. We want to. I mean, I've analyzed certain movies
Hmm.
multiple times just to keep going back to it. And for me, I'm predominantly a comedy writer, and I actually really like. I don't know if I would say modern comedies because these were
Hmm.
all late 90s, early 2000s comedies, but that's my fixation. I will analyze comedies from that era because they just seemed to be some kind of peak in what was funny. And I think it was because we had come through a period of time where we weren't supposed to make certain jokes. We got to that point where it was like, you can joke about absolutely anything.
Hmm.
And now we've gone back down the other side of, no, no, you can't, because that's offensive. And I think we're actually now coming out of that again, back into, no, 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 it's okay to joke about that kind of stuff. So it just comes in peaks and troughs. But there seemed to be a peak at about late 90s, early noughts, where some really great comedy was coming out. Anyway, again, derailing.
No, it's fine. I mean, what I think about when I talk to like younger people now, when they'll be like, "Oh, like old movies, like Lord of the Rings," and I'm just like,
Yeah,
no,
again, aging me. I
I
worked at a
know."
cinema when that movie came out, so I was about 18 or 19, I think. Yeah, some fond memories. I was on screens duty, which essentially means you sit at the back of the screen and make sure nobody makes too much noise during the showing. So on an average day, you watch the same movie 4 or 5 times.
That was
And
definitely
Lord,
not an American theater because we do not
no,
have that. Yeah, no, no, it's
I
just
don't think we have it in the UK anymore either. This was back
okay.
when,
That makes sense.
being polite was a thing. So, and the number of times I actually had to get involved and say, keep the noise down was bare minimum. So my job was essentially watch the movie. Lord of the Rings is a tough one to watch 4 times a day. it's, it's quite long when you have to watch it multiple times.
You
And
can
you
only
end
fit it
up,
in 4 times a day.
it was,
Otherwise, you'd run out
yeah,
of a day. Yeah.
yes, you literally would. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the cinema was open longer when Lord of the Rings was first released, so we could fit in 4 showings. So
Yeah.
when do you when you've got your character,
Hmm.
so you've tested this idea initially, and the character's looking good. What comes next for you? You briefly mentioned theme a minute
Yeah.
ago, and my eyes lit up because that's the thing that I start with. We can talk about that a bit if you want to. But yeah, what comes after character for you?
I mean, I guess it would be theme in a way.
Oh, good.
I think when I've talked to you before, I mentioned Jim Jarmusch
Hmm.
specifically.
Hmm.
He's my personal favorite director, I would say. And through watching his movies, I think that kind of came to me was because he's like a very kind of typical kind of American independent director where it's a little slower than, a typical movie, and it's people might characterize him as like a character study. But what I think he does is it is a character study by the sort of the point of the movie is to kind of understand, this guy or this gal, although in his case I think it's pretty much all guys. But it's to understand this guy, and it's through, whatever he's doing over the course of the movie. So there is a lot of action in a way, but it's all sort of it's about like, okay, well, here's this person with this kind of outlook on life and this kind of not even like sometimes it's a philosophy, sometimes it's just here's what this kind of a person thinks about the world and how they engage with it. And through the course of, they've got this problem, here's how they solve it, or here's how they fail at solving it. From that, you kind of understand that character and you understand their worldview. So that's where I take it, where I take this character I've got, and by this process, hopefully I'll kind of understand those questions, like, what kind of a person is this? How do they see the world? What's kind of eating away at them? What maybe should they change about themselves? And then from there I kind of say, okay, well, what can happen in the story that what kind of a story would best reveal this about them? Sometimes I'll help myself out by I always, like I was saying before, like their career or just sort of a personal facet about them is always kind of important to me. So I'll already kind of have a setting, and I can think about, what are the kind of the problems that can happen here. Like if someone's like a tour guide, what are yeah, and I'll know about their character that they're kind of lonely. They're trying to make connections in their life, and I'll from there I can think about, okay, what kind of what can happen from there, combining tour guide, combining these questions of loneliness and trying to kind of make something out of your life when you feel like you're sort of disconnected. And then you sort of go down that path. And then it's really for me, it's a matter of kind of putting one foot in front of the other. Sometimes it happens faster than others, but this is the process that's really helped me.
It's it's one of those things that everybody probably does it slightly differently, but with all the same pieces ultimately
Mhm.
connecting. So you've got your character, theme, plot, structure. I think those are the big four.
Mhm.
And within each of those big four, there's several subcategories. Like within character, you've got flaw, you've got ability. I think within the plot, you've got irony, right? You've got what makes this person specifically the best person to do this, to go on this journey in a kind of
Mhm.
ironic way, so people are interested in watching it. It's fascinating to me how we all seem to come at this slightly differently. Actually, that's a good question. Where did you get this process from? Was it trial and error, or did you learn this? Was this in a book that you read or a course that you took?
Um,
Yeah,
it's
how did you
a
come
couple of
across
different, yeah,
this?
it comes from a couple different places. I think the specific focus on character is just sort of more personal. It's just kind of that's my sensibility. Um, but I went to the School of the Arts here in North Carolina. It's one of the few public art schools in the country, which I just think is I wouldn't have guessed I wouldn't have guessed North Carolina would be the one to get that, but hey, how do you like that?
It's always the ones you
Um,
least expect.
it's always the ones you it's like how Montana and Wyoming were like the first to let women to vote. It's like, huh,
Is
wouldn't have
that
thought that.
true? I did not know that.
Montana was the first one to let women vote, and Wyoming was or maybe it's the other way around. Wyoming was the first to let women vote. Montana was the first to elect a woman to Congress.
Wow, we're covering a lot of eclectic ground here today. This is
Yeah, I don't know
great
if any of
stuff
your
for the
if
podcast.
any watchers are watching Jeopardy or they're ever a contestant on Jeopardy, that maybe that'll come in handy. It'll be like what's it called, Slumdog Millionaire. Um,
Thank goodness I watched that one episode of the Right in the Head podcast.
yeah, right
Yeah.
before and then they get tortured backstage, and that they ask them how they knew. That's a little too Slumdog. Anyway,
Confession, I haven't actually seen Slumdog Millionaire, so I don't get the reference.
okay,
I know that he goes on a competition and all the stuff he's been through in life suddenly becomes useful. I think that's the concept.
basically,
So
yeah,
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
fun.
So I don't need to see it then. I know it.
It's a fun watch. It's okay.
I will
Anyway,
watch that if you watch the remake of Space Jam. That's the deal I'll make with you.
Well, then I guess it's a no for me.
Well, then I guess I'm not watching
Well,
Slumdog.
oh, yeah, you win some, you lose some. But no, I had some really good teachers at the School of the Arts here in North Carolina. And getting really into structure was a big thing they kind of hit us over the head with, in a nice way. Um, so
Can you
yeah,
hit someone over the head in a nice way?
they found a way. That's what makes a good teacher.
That's why they
Yeah.
teach, I guess.
But yeah, so really kind of figuring out structure, and those kind of beats, combining that with character, I would say, really kind of made things start to make sense. Um, like earlier on when I was writing, people would bring up, what do you call it? The hero's journey, and I would always think it was sort of hokey. Like I would be collaborating with someone. They would, on one instance, it literally said, "Okay, so now we have to have the meeting with the goddess." And I was like, "Buddy, this doesn't seem like a good way to write a script." But one teacher at the School of the Arts really kind of hit us with, it's not so much kind of the steps of the hero's journey that you should need to think about. It's like, why are they important? What do they represent? And so getting into, why certain beats of a story, why the structure of a story works, and what each kind of step means, to me kind of
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
made things click more, as opposed to like, this is the formula. It was more of like, well, here's what has made stories important, and that maybe you kind of can't see,
Hmm.
the voice behind the veil. And kind of
Yeah.
understanding that a little bit better helps.
It was the same for me going through. I definitely went through a Save the Cat phase, and I still am very grateful for that book
Hmm.
and the BS2 beats that also came from Mr. Schneider, I think. And yeah, it was going a bit deeper and understanding why those beats are important. So, do you need your hero to show an act of kindness in the opening act, like saving a cat? Not literally, but you don't want to make your protagonist dislikable. So that can work. There's exceptions to
Hmm.
every rule. But in general, especially if you're newer at this, I would say the message beneath the beat is that you need something to cling on to with your protagonist as relatable, likable, preferably, so that we want to see he or she do well. Same
Yeah.
with the bad guys closing in after the midpoint. It can be done in so many different ways. It's not literally bad guys advancing with machine guns coming to a pinch. It can be if it's an action movie,
Mhm.
but more often than not, it's just if things continuously went well, it would be kind of boring. So we need a downturn. We need something to go wrong, otherwise you lose people's interest quite quickly. Yeah, so it's the like you were saying, it's the importance of the beat itself rather than it's the importance of what it does to the story rather than the beat itself, I should say.
Yeah, I really don't like any advice that's like like something has to be a certain way. I think, yeah, understanding those kind of things helps. Like I always remember at some writer's workshop, someone else was doing like a horror story. Um, and someone in charge was like, "Well, the important thing to remember is, all horror stories are actually comedies." It's like, so you have to have that comedy element in there. And in my head, I was like, well, I mean, The Exorcist isn't funny. Like, I understand if
I
you mean
don't
like the
know.
evil.
Made me
Well,
chuckle a couple of times. I mean, the spinning head and the projectile vomit, that's kind of amusing. But I'll
in a
take your
way,
point. Take your
yeah.
point.
But the idea that, like, it was presented in a way that, like, it had, like, they have to be, like, everything
Right.
has to be the Evil
Right.
Dead,
Like a
really. When it's
golden
really
rule.
more of sense of, yeah, like, when people say that, they really mean it's about kind of, the way you build a joke and the way you build a scare are similar, and you have to think
Hmm.
about kind of surprises and subversion of expectation, things like that. But just telling someone like hard and fast, like, no, all horror movies are comedies. To like
Right. Right.
anything that's that rigid,
And you
or
need
you have
your
to have a Save the Cat.
right.
You have to
Inciting
have these
incident
12
has to be
steps.
page 20. Um,
Yeah, things like that.
that
Yeah.
that that actually did used to annoy me when I was writing my first few scripts because my inciting incident would be on page 22 and I'd be frantically trying to trim 2 pages to get it down to page 20. Uh, Probably not necessary. Depends, I
No, it
suppose.
it depends. I mean, it's funny I mean, the day doesn't matter. But last week, I was at a short film screening, um, and the person I was with next to me, they asked like, how long do you think a short film should be? And I just said, it depends how good it is. I mean, a lot of these things are very, it's like if you're
Yeah.
inciting instance on page 22, it's like, well, if the preceding 22 pages were good, it's like,
Yeah, if you keep
who
your audience
cares? Yeah,
interested. And there's other
exactly. Yeah.
movies that seem to dive straight into Act Two, if you ask me. I
Mhm.
recently rewatched Die Hard with a Vengeance, going back to my love of like 90s movies.
Is that four?
Three.
Okay.
So this is when he meets Samuel L. Jackson and he's being bullied by a guy called Simon, played by Jeremy Irons, who's
Yeah.
making him do all kinds of random challenges around New York City. There's really no setup in that movie. I love it. It goes straight into massive explosion in New York City, police phones ringing off the hook, Simon making demands, John McClane caught up in the middle of it all. It's just straight into it. I just watched it like, yeah, that's a great start to an action movie. Like, we don't really need
Mm.
much setup. We know who this guy is. We've seen the first two movies. So
Yeah.
let's just get on with it. It was really quite fun to watch from that perspective because I haven't watched it since I started to study screenwriting. So to watch it through that lens of how they crafted that story was very different to just watching it as an action movie as a kid in the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I will say,
okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
sorry, no, yeah, I don't mean to. But one thing I've kind of gotten since school that's been a big kind of change is I study a lot more acting, not from the perspective I want to act because I really don't enjoy acting, but in terms of like when I was trying to learn how to direct actors better, I tried to understand more of their more of the process, and the more I read about how to kind of get for an actor to kind of get a good performance, the more I kind of see where that comes in the script side, and it's a lot of things have helped me with the writing. And then now when I'm like a big thing is saying yes instead of no, not in a kind of like eat, pray, love way, but in terms of and both I'll see actors kind of do this, but then I'll see it in people's scripts too, where a character has some sort of, a question will come up. And so often the instinct is for them to say, no, no, I don't do that. No, I don't feel that way. When every time that comes up, I always think, well, if you said yes, you're opening up a road. And especially if you're early on in a process writing, saying to yourself, like, okay, there's these two characters, do they like each other? If you say yes instead of no, that then some ideas kind of start coming to you and there's ways you can kind of
Hmm.
take it.
It's very much along the lines of the improv comedy, isn't it? The yes
Yeah.
and of it all. And I've done a bit of improv, so that's one of the most important, not a rule, but guidelines. If you say no to your scene partner, you've just ended the scene.
Yeah.
You've ruined it. So yes and to almost everything that your partner suggests. I've never
Yeah.
really thought about that in terms of writing it into a script, but it makes sense. You open yourself up to a lot more possibilities.
Yeah, like I had like an espionage script, and I when I would describe it to people in the very early stages, I would I'd say this character is hiding who he is and he's lying and and then he doesn't want to be outed as a spy. And someone was asking like, oh, is that a metaphor for him being gay? And in my head, that was never part of the story. But when I was like when I said, okay, let's say it is, that completely changed the whole script. And like now the way that script is now, like you couldn't imagine this being about like a straight man. It's like has to be a story about a gay man who's trying to do this whole crazy story while also trying to hide who he is, and then the people he meets along the way, et cetera, et cetera. And if I had just been like, no, then it's like, okay, then it's just a story about that then this whole world is not
Right.
open to me. So things like that.
I allow myself now to do more of this. So I hadn't thought about it as saying yes to more things. However, now that you've given me that example, what I find myself doing now is allowing my ideas to kind of sprawl out, knowing that not many of them are going to actually end up in the script, but it's okay to go down this road for now and just explore it and think, what would that do? And there's a part of me that's painful because if I eventually do say yes to this new idea, that's going to involve a lot of rewriting because I've already got some of the script in place and it would change that. But if it makes it a better script, that's surely the right approach. So it's kind of, I don't know if you, I feel like I'm asking the wrong person. Have you seen Avengers? I believe it's Infinity Wars.
Yeah, I have.
So
Yeah, that's
there's
fine.
a
Yeah,
scene where, well, I only mention it because there's a scene where Doctor
sure.
Strange is kind of sitting in this meditative position and his head is like vibing all over the place. And it turns out he's going into the future and looking at all the millions of possible outcomes so he can determine the one that would be successful for the Avengers. And that image comes to my head when I'm planning a script now because I'm just allowing myself to go in millions of different directions and playing with all of them. And it's frustrating because they all could work and you don't really know which one, but you don't really say no to any of them until you've explored them. And then you come back to this place of, okay, now how do I connect that to the story that I want to tell? And it's less, I want to say it's less efficient. It's not as quick as just sticking to the idea you initially had and going with that. But I do think it ends up in stronger scripts because you've explored more options. In your words, you've said yes to more possibilities. Does that kind of connect to what you were saying?
Yeah, I mean, what's even more inefficient is what I really do is where it's like I really don't know the structure of the script until I write the first draft, and I realize like, well, here's all the things I did wrong, for lack of a better word. That it's kind of not until I finish it and I've kind of capped off this story that I kind of realize, well, here's actually what the structure should have been. Here's all the things that I should have done. I mean, the more I write, the less of those bumps there are. But inevitably, the the structure of the first and final draft. It's not that there is any really hard final draft for me. Um, are fairly different. There's usually in through the course of writing, I'm going to understand better how the story should go, how these things should come up.
Yeah, I would say that right now I'm too far in the other direction. So I will do weeks, if not months, of planning, character development, backstory, outlining, and then I'll start writing actual pages. And in a way, that feels good because when I start writing those pages, I know where I'm going. So they fly out of me. I can do 20 pages a day because I've got such a great outline. But inevitably, when I start doing the pages, that's when I start to get more insight because I'm seeing the actual script. And I think to myself, I probably should have started doing pages earlier in this process, even if I didn't have a super tight outline, because it would have helped to inform the outline. You know, they work, it's a symbiotic relationship, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I still do plenty of outlining, and then I do my process, which I was like, that's probably even more inefficient. But I mean, that's how it's. I
Hey,
wouldn't
look,
recommend it for
we're
everyone.
all trying to make everything more efficient all the time, and I
Yeah,
want it to be linear, Michael. I want to start with theme and then develop character and then figure out what that means to plot and then do structure. And it's roughly that, but it's more like all over the place, touching on each of those four, coming back to because every one of them informs the other three. And so I don't know if it's ever linear. It's But for me, it's not anyway. Unless you're
yeah,
cranking out, I'm not picking on anybody here, but if you're cranking out something like a Hallmark movie where there is literally a formula, fair enough. That could be quite a linear process. But I think if you're coming up with a new concept that's your own work, I don't know if it's ever start here, then progress to this, then do this, and now your script is finished. Ta-da! It doesn't feel like that for me anyway. I want it to because I'm a very linear thinker, but it
hmm
never goes that way.
yeah. I mean, yeah. There's always lots of scenes and bits and pieces that kind of get left to the side that you can't use anymore. I mean, that is, I guess, advice for like a new screenwriter is like initially it is very difficult to, you know, like dump like a whole scene or lines of dialogue that you love. But it's like you get to a certain point, it's like I've dumped like the first two acts. It's like you kind of you get used to it.
It's painful,
Um,
man. It's
yeah.
painful.
Usually there's like I mean, you know, don't delete the file. You know, you can find, you know, pieces of that you can still reuse later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to kind of get used to just saying like, you know what, you wrote some great scenes, but you'll write more good ones. It's like you just kind of have to jettison it if you're going to make this work.
Yeah, makes me so grateful for computers and copy paste. Because if you imagine, I don't know why I think about this, but sometimes I
Yeah.
think about back in the days of using typewriters, rewrites must have been even worse than they are now. You can't even copy and paste bits of it unless it's a whole page. I suppose you could reuse it, but you have to retype all of that stuff. Anyway, again, derailing. It's just,
No, I never understood why there's so why like growing up people had so much like whiteout, and then until it got to the point where I was like, oh, because you they didn't have a computer. It makes sense.
yeah, there was a joke that went around my school when I was a youngster. I forget the details of it now, but it was something along the lines of how do you know when an old person has been using your computer? It's because there's whiteout on the screen. Something like that. Something hugely derogatory towards old people who I massively respect. Just gonna clarify that. So we've got character and then sort of blending into that the theme, and it sounds like from there maybe you're starting to do some pages and start mapping out your story. Is that the process? Have I missed something? Is there a beat there that I didn't catch? Because what I'm trying to do is get down to this process of idea to script, and I think I see your journey there, but did I miss any of
Mhm.
it out?
Um, it's I mean, there's a lot of just sort of sitting with it and dreaming and things like that. There's sort of, esoteric things. I say esoteric like I'm doing, spells. I mean, just in terms of there's kind of there's sort of unteachables, I think, that are going to be different to every person between, getting character and theme and then getting an out and then going from there to an outline. Um, I think research is again a really big thing for me. Um, a lot of my ideas come from doing the research. Um, I'll it's like I'll finish a script and give it to people, and they'll think I'm like writing. Sometimes not this. I guess this sounds a little too braggadocious, but sometimes I'll write a script about a certain like subculture or whatever and give it to someone for notes, and they'll think I'm like, oh, this must be like your life's passion. Like you were always a basketball player. Now you're telling the basketball story. And it's like,
Mm.
no, not once. It's like
Great sign, though. Great sign.
I mean,
Shows that the research is
it
working.
is a good sign when things like that
Yeah.
happen. But
Curious to know sort of how does the research translate into script? So researching for use the basketball example again. What
sure.
types of things are you researching and how does that inform your script? Is it terminology? Is it game patterns? Is it the industry itself? All of the above?
Um, the basketball one might be a bad example because it was a supernatural basketball story, so there was a lot of weird stuff going on in there.
And yet it wasn't Space Jam.
I
Come
guess it was,
on.
and yet it wasn't space. Well, that's not supernatural. Aliens are natural. They're just,
Yeah,
an
fair
animal.
enough.
Yeah. But
Fair enough. What's supernatural? Anyway, you know what? Let's not derail
Teen
again
Wolf.
then.
Teen Wolf, that's a supernatural basketball movie.
Good good
Werewolves are not
example.
natural. They don't, Carl
Or
Sagan
do
never
they?
Carl Sagan never saw a werewolf,
Mm.
as far as I know. But no, it's a matter of, I mean, I'll usually like with that, I mean, I already kind of knew a little bit of where I wanted to go with it. I wanted to make this story about this character's journey from college to the NBA, but there's also supernatural stuff going on. But I kind of started with, okay, it's probably not a linear process. What's it look like to be a professional basketball player in other countries? And then I just sort of read about experiences in Europe, experiences in the developmental league, experiences in China. In my case, what was going on in China really interested me. So I did much more of a deep dive into, you know, um, what's it like to be, an expat in China. Um, and from there, you start getting ideas about it, things will come up to you that are just sort of interesting. You put a pin in them. Like in my case, a lot of ideas about kind of America and China's kind of financial interdependence ended up being a big part of the story. Um, now I feel I'm losing the audience. But no, things like that where things will start to stick out to you that you're like, okay, that's interesting. How can my character kind of um, deal with that?
Mm. I
Or
love the
like
fact
with
that you assume that we have an audience. That's so complimentary of you. Thank you
hey,
very
I've
much.
seen I've seen the views on the videos. I know you're not. I know you're doing good.
Yeah, we're doing okay. We're doing okay. So, something I do want to touch on is
Yeah.
probably one of the final questions is when you start mapping out your story, how do you overcome issues with the story? As you're writing it, you notice something that doesn't add up, or this is not the direction you wanted it to go in. Do you have a process to, first of all, identify what the root cause of this problem is with your script and then to fix it? This is something I'm really interested in because I'm still working on this for myself. I find myself struggling with a certain element of my script and I know it's not quite right, but I struggle to sometimes diagnose why. So I then struggle to come up with a solution. How do you think through these moments?
Yeah. I mean, that's probably the toughest part of the process. Um,
Oh, good. So it's not
I
just
was
me
gonna say,
then.
sorry.
It's not just
Yeah.
me.
No.
I'm not just terrible at this. Okay, good.
I
Good.
mean, usually I'll try to if well identifying it is I think it's if you're not giving to someone else for notes, um, diagnosing it is kind of just intuition, just a mix of experience plus whatever your voice is as a writer. Will kind of pick up on those things. But once you have the problem, I usually will break it down just to it whatever its base components are. I'll try to treat it like I do with a scene like to me the way I try to write scenes are as kind of microcosms of the story. They have the same structure, they'll have the same kind of conflict. So I'll sort of take it to that kind of molecular level, and I'll say, okay, what's not working out here? Why is my character not likable? People are telling me my character is not likable, and so I'll sort of take it from the beginning, and I'll say, okay, let me look at these scenes, what's kind of going on in these scenes, what what structurally should be there, what kind of thematically should be there, what's not, and take it from that kind of basic level. I'll try to just really break it down. Um, Sometimes a thing that's kind of a bad habit of mine is I'll write characters into his dilemma, and then I'll be like, okay, how did they get out of it? I don't know. When it's things like that, I'll one is research. If I'm writing about something that's kind of connected to research, I'll really just dig into it and see just any kind of facet of it, what's kind of workable here. Um, but usually it's a matter of really sitting down with the problem and just writing out lots and lots of possible scenarios, kind of just talking through it in your head.
Yeah,
Um,
doing the Doctor Strange thing, seeing all the
I mean, really, I mean,
possibilities.
that's the most kind of Doctor Strangey moments, I would
Yeah,
say,
it
are
is.
those parts where
Yeah,
your character's in a dilemma and you
yeah,
don't know how
yeah,
to get them through. Or it's just kind of the
yeah,
broader thing where, if something's not working in the story. What,
yeah. The other
yeah.
way I like to think of that is you're an AI and you're sampling. AI works by sampling. It runs millions of samples and then, you know, predicts or picks the most likely one to be successful. So that's how they train AI to play games like Go and how they train a computer to play chess. So you're, unfortunately, as a screenwriter, you're only able to sample a very, very slow rate, not millions of ideas per second, but that's the feeling. That's how I imagine it. If I'm not, it's one of the other analogies gets me through those moments. I'm either an AI sampling ideas or I'm Doctor Strange predicting the future. Either one, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's still painful, but it helps me to
Yeah.
think this is normal. This is what creativity actually feels like. It's banging your head against a wall to get through to the next. Oh yeah, that works. Those are the moments we love, but you have to do the work to get to those moments. They don't just come to you. Oh look, here's a problem. Got the solution. Move on. Unfortunately, that's not how it feels.
Yeah. I mean, that's where like voice comes in. Like, I feel like a lot of people ask about like, how do I have my voice in a story? And it is kind of like, well, in the same way that like what your characters do in a story determines, what makes your story special. I think like what you do as a writer helps kind of speak to your voice. Like for me, it's very kind of detail and research based. I think that kind of comes through in my stories. Um, for other people, it's other things, that would be a good place to have an
Mm-hmm.
example in my head. But hey, we play the cards we're dealt.
we can
Um,
we can edit one in if you want to take a second to think about it.
I mean, this isn't really answering this, but this is still going to make me seem really clever. I mentioned like Sweet Smell of Success earlier on.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, the director, Alexander McKendrick, he has a really good book about filmmaking, and one of the things about it that I like is um, he has the first draft of this of he is part of two scenes, the first draft and then the shooting script in it, and he talks about how um, if you haven't if anyone has seen the Sweet Smell of Success, it's the first scene where you meet Burt Lancaster's character, who's like the one of the scariest characters in a movie. Um, and so it's really important to get that right. And then he'll show the first draft and he'll really talk through here's what we can kind of pick up on that's not working, but here's how through identifying that we can kind of, find a solution. Like for example, in the original draft, he's making kind of a crude joke and it doesn't really go over well. So in the shooting script, a big part of the scene is that someone tells him a crude joke and he is like, that's not good. You're fired, your career's ruined, etc. It's taking those kind of weaknesses and kind of through understanding them, you sort of find your solution and also strengthen your script. So being able to identify what's not working is super important, I think.
Yeah, agreed. Any final advice for those listeners that we have who are
Mhm.
thinking about this process of idea to script and wanting to make it either more efficient or maybe more enjoyable, more predictable in some ways, so they know that they're going to end up with a good script based on their idea? Is there something we haven't talked about here so far that you would like to share with people?
Um, I don't know that. I mean, I guess I would always really just double down on character, on those getting those kind of basic things that really sit with your character. Even if it's not, sometimes it's an ensemble. I mean, usually the ensemble, you can think about it the same way that they'll have a component to them. Um, and what do they want? What's their philosophy? What's their kind of outlook on life? Not being afraid to kind of make your story very subjective is, I think, very powerful. I'll see a lot of people give notes on things that will say like, well, I disagree with what that character's saying. And it's like, well, I'm sure you do, but I mean, it's their movie. So, I'm sure the writer doesn't agree with them, but having like a subjective point of view really can really do a lot. That can really kind of give you some momentum that you're kind of experiencing things through someone's eyes. I mean, personally, that's why I like to go to the movies, is to see someone, different than myself. So, um, yeah, I mean, that's the big thing. And then do the same with your antagonist, I would say. I mean, we kind of left that out. But I know when I'm stuck, I try to think about like, well, if things are, especially if like things are feel too easy for your character, it's like, okay, well, if you're the bad guy, what would you do?
Right.
Especially
And
because you've read the
they
script, so you're smarter than them.
and they all have really, really good reasons. Well, the good villains, the good antagonists, they all have great reasons for what they're doing. That's what makes
Mhm.
them interesting. So if you don't know that yet, go deeper into that. That might be the solution you're looking for.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be something you agree with. I mean, that's the same thing where I'll I'll
No,
I'll
no,
have an
absolutely
antagonist who's
not.
like, okay, well, here's my philosophy on the world. Here's what I'm doing, and I'll get notes being like, I don't agree with that. It's like, well, yeah, that's the bad guy.
Yeah, I didn't really agree with Thanos, but it didn't mean it ruined the movie
Yeah,
for
you
me. I had to just
understand why he's doing it. I mean, that's the important thing.
cleaning up the universe. I can get on board with that. Extinct, killing 50% of it, maybe not the best strategy, but the overall goal, kind of see where
Yeah,
he was coming from. Anyway,
you know, I run into a lot of scripts where a character, either a hero or a villain, they'll write in that they're just like they're crazy,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I'll get like, well, then they can just do whatever.
yeah,
And it's like, well,
yeah. It's not
that
interesting, is
one, it's
it?
hard to write. Two, it's hard to kind of latch on, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, Michael, this has been great. I've enjoyed the conversation, and it's been great to have you as a guest on the podcast. I know that you've been a follower for a while, and one of the things that brings me joy is to invite the followers on and have a chat about this wonderful thing we do called screenwriting. So anywhere people can go to follow up with you, learn more about your work, follow you online, anywhere we can send them.
sure. I mean, I post my work on michaelpapich.com. I've been posting on Instagram on just Michael Papich 9 at Instagram. I guess all the other Michael Papiches were taken. But I've
All of
been
the other
posting up.
hundreds of Michael Papiches.
Yeah, I've been posting updates on my film shoot there, as well as just pictures of my cat. I would also really encourage people, especially if any viewers are in the North Carolina or South Carolina or even Tennessee or Virginia area, the new Carolinas Film Collective. That's been a really great resource to help people in the area kind of connect to each other and improve our skills and find each other to hire. Like on my film shoot, most of the crew at least, I found through the New Carolinas Film Collective. So they have websites, they have Twitter, they have Instagram, etc.
Yeah, we'll definitely
So
put that in the
anyone
description. That's a good
anyone
shout
want to check
out.
that out? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thank you for your time. Thank you for
Thank you.
your insight here. I love this conversation about process. You've definitely given me some things to think about as I continue to refine my process. Let's do part 2 in the coming months.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Take care.
Yeah, stay safe.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Right in the Head podcast with guest Michael Papich. I hope you took some great insights away. I know I did. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this every single week. Also, you can head over to rightinthehead.org where you can join our free community for screenwriters. I send a weekly newsletter. We do episodes of the podcast, other things as well, live events on Zoom. Head over there, check it all out. And also, if there's a video that happens to pop up on your screen right now, goodness knows if there will be, it will be in the bottom corner somewhere, like the end plate does in YouTube. Go ahead and click on that to watch even more content aimed at screenwriters. See you there.